Good evening. Hope all is well. Hope you can hear me. Having connection issues. um, don't know what's going on. Having a lot of connection issues going on tonight. Um, we hope is doing what he needs to do in all of our lives. We just pray that God's grace is sufficient. We believe that God's mercy is ever, and we believe that God is wonderful. Last week we about faith. We want to do that again this week. We want to share and talk a lot more about that. I hope and pray well with with you and your every Sunday at the Renaissance Fellowship. Going on, maybe the weather that's dealing with this. It may be. I got all kind of stuff going on. I got a There we go. Hopefully, my son will clear this up, and we got everything clear. We're good to go. We're good to go. So again, we talked about faith on last week. Faith is the substance of things hoped for. It's the evidence of things not seen. Hope and pray all is well with you and yours, and we hope that all is well with you, and God will continue to bless. So again, as I'm waiting for things to shift, okay, there it is. It's much better now. Much better. We're getting there. All right. We are so grateful that everything has worked out and we're good to go. All right, just technical difficulties. So, as we look at this whole thing in Hebrews from last week, um, we found out so much, and we gleaned, and we talked about now faith is the substance of things hoped for, it's the evidence of things not seen. Now faith, what does that mean? And we talked about Cain and Abel, the righteous. One was righteous, God testifying of his gifts. And we look at this whole situation. How do we deal with that? And we talked about Enoch's faith last week. Tonight, as we pick up, and we just thank God for all of you, each of you. Tonight, as we pick up, we look at the whole stratosphere and we say, hey, it's Noah's faith. It says, by faith, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of the household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. Look at the whole situation. Noah being divinely warned of things not seen. Noah was warned of something that he had not seen before. He had looked at the situation, the parameters. His faith was shown, and not merely agreeing that the flood would come, but so what would happen regarding the flood. And again, we've talked about you got to have faith in realizing that sometimes God just tells you to go. He doesn't give you down everything to break to you. He doesn't for you. I just know it just works out for good of all of us as we look at this whole scripture and realize and rationalize the faith, the whole faith movement. So when we look at this, what do we look at? We look at contextually, we look at it spiritually, we look at it emotionally, we look at what God is trying to tell us. He simply said he was moved by godly fear. It was godly fear that moved Noah to realize and recognize, hey, I must do something, that I've got to do something, that I got to continue to move. Prepared in art, real faith would always do something. The book of James repeats his theme over and over again. He condemned the world. We shouldn't think that Noah was a man who preached sermons of condemnation to the world. Instead, the mere conduct of the godly without the preaching of it at all is more than that, can feel the condemnation to the world. So Noah did exactly what God had told him, but he did it with fear. A lot of times, ladies and gentlemen, we move from faith to fear, and faith in the life of Abraham and the patriarchs. So not only it begins this whole section talking about, for it was by the elders they obtained good testimony. And it says, we talk about the definition of faith, faith does not contradict reason. It doesn't go beyond reason. Faith means that we are trying to identify and to have beliefs in things that we not necessarily can see at times. We have to look at our lives and look back on retrospect and look at what God is trying to tell us on a daily basis. So when we move forward and we look at these situations, it says, we talked about Abel, we talked about Enoch, we just talked about Noah's faith in the life of Abraham's obedience by faith. As we look at this Passion Week, we have to have faith to know that God knew what he was doing when he allowed his son Jesus to die for our sins. There's so many different things that took place and transpired this week that causes us to reflect on the journey to Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. So many different things happen scripturally from Matthew 25. There are a series of events that take place. Verse number 8 says, by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place which he would receive as an inheritance. He was going. By faith, Abraham obeyed. Abraham did step out in faith, going to a place that God promised him, but his faith was less than perfect. And there are times, ladies and gentlemen, that our faith is less than perfect, that we're not on our game, we're not as sharp as we think we are at times. There are sometimes we just go through the motions or the emotions of life. His faith was less than perfect. This is seen by comparing Genesis 12, 1 through 5 with Acts 7. It's evident that Abraham first went had called him only to obey, completely obey. Haven't we done that in our lives, where we have given God half of our response, half of our yes, and not a complete yes, not a whole yes, but we've been looking at our situations simply saying, oh my goodness, God, are you us? What are you trying to tell me to do at this stage? And we have to reconsider that. We have to reconsider that, ladies and gentlemen, when we look at the fact that, and I'm having connection issues, that's why I have to pause. Again, I don't know if they're working on the line or what's going on. But again, when we look at this, have we all been in a situation where we said, look, God, I will go where you have me to go, only to have trepidation in our lives? That's no different here. By faith, Abraham obeyed. He stepped out there. It was evident that he did it half, and he completely obeyed. Thousands of years later, God remembered the delayed obedience, only the faith. And isn't it amazing how God, he remembers your whole yes. He remembers everything that you do, not just half giving, half providing, half sacrifice that we give to his whole. He's given us whole everything. If we look at our lives, we see the wholeness, the trueness of what is going on. That's amazing. Abraham's sojourning life of faith. It says, verse number 9 says, by faith, here we go with the by faith movement. He dwelt in the land of promise as in a far country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs of him that of the same promise. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. By faith he dwelt in the land of promise. Abraham lived as a sojourner in the land God promised, he never owing any of it except the plots that he and Sarah were buried in. Dwelt, translating the ancient Greek word periokos, 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 describing a resident alien, one who lives at a certain place but doesn't have permanent status there. To dwell, he dwelt in the land of promise. So he resided in a certain place but doesn't have permanent status there. A lot of times we deal with that today. We have people that live but don't have permanent status. And I don't know about you, ladies and gentlemen, but it's funny when we look at life and look at life through the eyeglasses of Christendom, we find that sometimes we live in a place and not have a permanent residence. Dwelling in tents, it's just amazing. A resident alien or a sojourner is evident. The way they talk, the way they dress, their mannerisms, their entertainment, their citizens, and their friends all speak of a native home. There's no place like home. I'm from South Carolina. I've been in Las Vegas some 16 years. And sometimes, there's a pull. There's a pull because I miss home. I miss the culture. I miss the trees. I miss the grass. I miss a lot of what I was accustomed to, citizenship. I was used to that. If someone is the same in all of these areas as natives, they are no longer sojourners. Some people are sojourners. They're coming in or passing through. Then you have nomads, people that have no place to go. We have to realize that what God is saying, what he is doing as we move forward. Dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, because they had no permanent home. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob lived in tents instead of houses. They looked forward to a better city, a city which has foundation, whose builder and maker is God. As you sojourn, that means you continuously moving, you're passing through, you're trying to find footing in a footless foundation. And we have to realize and recognize, what is God telling us or saying to us or abiding in us? What is he trying to show us? The celebration of this whole thing. And ladies and gentlemen, as we look at this whole situation, what are we saying with our faith? By faith, he did that by faith. 11 and 12 says, by faith, Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed. And she bore a child which she was past the age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as a good and dead, were born as many as the stars in the sky in the multitude, innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. By faith, Sarah's faith was not perfect. She first laughed in unbelief when she was first told this. And then she learned to laugh in faith. We often say that God is funny because God moves in mysterious ways. When you least expect it, God moves. When you look at the whole outlook and the shortcoming, God moves. Because she judged him faithful who had promised. Faith comes down to judging that God is faithful and he keeps his promises. We have to believe that as Christians, ladies and gentlemen, that God will keep his promise. That God will and continue to keep his promise as long as we believe and abide in him and trust him. It was this faith that enabled Sarah to receive strength to conceive a seed. God gave the strength, but Sarah received it by faith. And again, we walk by faith and not by sight. We continue to press the go button when sometimes we want to press the pause button or the stop button. It says, by faith, Sarah, it says, were born as many as stars of the sky in multitude. Because of the faith of Sarah, Abraham, and thousands, even millions of descendants were born, their faith had an impact on more lives than ever dreamed of, than they could ever dream of. Ladies and gentlemen, that gives us hope when Sarah has faith, when Enoch has faith, when Noah has faith, Abraham has faith. This whole section, it illustrates that these people had faith, but that doesn't make them perfect. That gives us hope when we look at the whole situation of life and says, yes, we have faith. Yes, we may be strong in certain areas, but we've got to learn how to hang on in there. What the faith of Abraham and Sarah teaches us, these verses number 13 through 16, these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on earth. For those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. And truly, if they had called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would. And truly, they would have had an opportunity to return. But now they desire better. That is a heavenly country. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. And as we look at this whole section, again, it's not about the runner that crosses the finish line first. It's not about the winning candidate on the election night, the celebrity Oscar winner. It's not about all these that get the applause and the congratulations. But again, who cheers for the fired coworker or factory worker leaving work for the last time, believe that God is going to make a way out of no way? Who's cheering when some of us are struggling, just trying to make ends meet, not just with bills, but really trying to focus on our faith and family? How do we put one foot in front of the other when we have two steps that are going back consistently? These all died in faith. So when we look at the whole by faith shift, these all died in faith, not having received the promises. The promise of the Messiah was made to Abraham and Sarah, and they believe the promise, yet they died having never received it, only seeing it in faith. Wow. Isn't that amazing? They saw the promises afar off, willing to look at and consider the promise of God, even though the fulfillment seemed so far away. They were assured of them, carefully considering the promise, assured that the promise was valid because God made the promise. God made the promise. They embraced them, taking the promise and embracing it in faith. Abraham and Sarah probably thought many times about the Son of God, the promise them. He promised them these many times. They embraced the promise. The saints embraced the promises. They embraced the promises, but they had never received it, only seeing it in faith. And that's why faith is a very unique mechanism. Faith responds to what you believe. Faith, it gives us hope in a hopeless situation. It gives us help in a helpless world. They confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims, ladies and gentlemen. Abraham, and Sarah always took the promise with the understanding that the world was not their home. And we've heard that before. We've heard people say the world is not your home. What is our home? What is God trying to tell us? What is he saying to us? What is he showing us? What is God saying? These all died. They died in faith. We look at this whole situation and outlook. We focus on what is God trying to tell us in the midst of our shifting of our lives and the work of our lives, and how God trying to tell us and the elaborate nature of society. These all died in faith. They did not seek faith. They did not need to seek faith. Deathbed. They died in faith. And the question is that something you're ready to do, to die in faith. It says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for. It's the evidence of things not seen. They never went beyond faith and grew beyond simple dependence on God. They never went below faith or lost faith. They seek a homeland. We're seekers. We're trying to find our place. And as we look at this whole thing called Passion Week, what did Jesus do for us? What did he embody in us for this week? What are the sacrifices that he made? It could have been at the trial, but before you get to trial, there were always people that were watching, whether he was at the woman's house who poured the very expensive perfume over his head to prepare him for the death, burial, and resurrection. What kind of faith did Jesus have as he continued to walk from house to house this week? And as we continue to move, what kind of faith do you have as you continue to press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling? What kind of faith do you have as we move forward? Faith is very difficult when we live as this commentary says practical atheists. This describes someone who may have a theoretical belief in God, but the belief doesn't matter in what they do today. Some people theoretical belief, yes, God, but I don't know about some of the God stuff or God things. And I want to encourage us to continue to strengthen that bond and relationship with God to move forward. When we remember there is a spiritual reality, a heavenly home that is our real home, a heavenly home that is our real home, faith is much easier. The great theme of modern times is naturalism, the belief of only what can be found and measured in nature is real. Scientists and educators who trust the naturalism may be content to let us believe in God just as long as we agree that God is a fairy tale. Someone not real. They just want you to believe in God, but they want you to believe that God is not real. We look at the current climate of our country and our cities and our communities. We look at it as we have people that believe in this naturalism kind of thing, that yes, God is real, but maybe he operates in a fairy tale. And we want God, and we need God to continue to move in our churches, in our communities, in our country. It says, therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God. We look at Abraham and Sarah, and we look at the others. It's by faith that they did A, B, C, D, or E. But again, a lot of times they didn't live to see it, but you had to walk in it. That's why you walk by faith and not by sight. We have to realize that we have to walk in faith on a daily basis. We have to strengthen our stance on who we are and whose we are. We often consider the idea we should not be ashamed of God, but we must also consider that we make God ashamed of us. Is God ashamed of us? Does God look at us and say, yes, okay, my child, there is another opportunity, another way. There's a whole nother way of looking at this thing called life. He says, Abraham's faith was great enough to know God was able to raise the dead and that God was able to keep his promises. Abraham knew this. People know this. They know this on a daily basis, but do you believe it? You know it happened because in biblical times, throughout biblical history, there was a lot of talk of what Jesus did. But do you believe what he did? By faith, 17 says, by faith, Abraham was, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and who had received promises, offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called, concluding that God was able to raise him up, even from the dead, from which he had received him in a figurative sense. Abraham received the test, as most of us do it sometimes in our lives. He offered up his son Isaac. The verb tense for offered up indicates that Abraham was concerned the sacrifice was complete, that he was going to lose his son, that he had offered that up to God, offered up his only begotten son, that Abraham had another son, Ishmael, the son of the fleshly attempt to fulfill God's promise. God did not recognize the other son, so Isaac could be called his only begotten son. And we look at it contextually. What have you offered up to God? When we look at it spiritually, what are we saying to God? What are we believing God? Accounting that God was able. Yeah, accounting means it's a term of arithmetic, accounting, expressing a decisive and carefully reasoned act. This means that Abraham calculated God's promise worthy of confidence. Accounting, he was accounting that God was able. He was understanding and depending on the fact that yes, God is able, that God's got everything. He's got it all in his hands. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, what does this look like? When we look at our lives and we look through the eyeglasses and we say, hey, from the dead, from which he had also received him. As far as Abraham was concerned, Isaac was as good as dead, and it was from the dead that he received him back in a manner that prefigured the resurrection of Jesus. Such a powerful statement when we look at this. The text, when Abraham was confronted with a promise and the command from God, which seemed to contradict each other, he did what he should do. He obeyed the command and let God take care of the promise. Isn't that amazing? That's a powerful statement. Sometimes we just need to obey the command and leave the promise up to God. Let me say that again. We need to obey the command and leave the promises up to God. Such a powerful statement when we look at it. And we look at it, we obey the command. The command was given. I need you to offer up your son, your only begotten son, Isaac. He obeyed the command, and the promise was that in the end, he was able to keep his son. Man, that's powerful when we look at this whole thing and we look at this situation. We look at life's journey. It says Isaac's faith. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. Isaac was really in the flesh, not in the faith, when he first intended to bless Esau instead of Jacob. He wanted to bless Esau with the birthright for carnal reasons. He liked Esau a little bit more manly, and he liked the wild game he brought home. Instead, he should have chosen Jacob, whom God chose. Again, we need to focus on God's command and leave the promises up to him. Man, that's powerful. Every time I think about that statement, it's amazing how we should definitely do that. By faith, Isaac blessed. Yet Isaac came to a place of faith when he discovered that he actually blessed Jacob instead of Esau. Isaac trembled exceedingly. When Isaac trembled exceedingly, he was troubled because he knew that he had tried to box God in, to defeat God's plan, and that God beat him. God has the willingness and the ability to do that, to box us in and force us to make a decision. Scripture says, choose ye this day whom you shall serve. We tend to look at that and not realizing or recognize one thing or the other. What is God saying? What are we seeing? What is he saying when it comes to our lives and our faith? Man, by faith, the faith in Isaac's blessing came in after Isaac's attempt to thwart the will of God was destroyed, when he said to Jacob, and indeed he shall be blessed. He shall be blessed. That's one of the strong things. He shall be blessed. That helps us. By faith, when he was dying, blessing each of the sons of Joseph and worship leaning on top of his staff. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph. Wow. Jacob led a rather carnal life, yet his faith could also look beyond death, and he blessed each of his sons. And worship leaning on the top of the staff, Jacob had to lean on the top of his staff because he was given a limp many years before, when God confronted him in Peniel. As he learned on his staff, he remembered that God was great and held his future and the future of his descendants. So when we look at this and we look at this whole subjective thing, what do we find? We find that in praise of faith. We look at the situation as we reflect. What do you think it means to live by faith? Who is someone you know that would say lies, or excuse me, who would you say lives that way? Personal reflections. When you wish you had more faith, what would you do? When you wished it at times, what do you think God would do? The Bible cheers for God's faithful people, and nowhere does the cheer sound more loudly and definitely than in the 11th chapter of the book of Hebrews. The letter to the Hebrews was written by the unknown Christian to a group of persecuted Jewish Christians. Consider these things, and then I'm finished. Consider the actions of each of the people named in the passage. What does their behavior have in common? Behavior has in common so much. They had faith, um, but sometimes the faith wasn't activated with regards to um, until they died. The whole situation with Abraham and Sarah, sometimes the results are not until they had transition. So we look at that, and what does that say to us? That we need to walk by faith on a consistent basis. We need to look the part. We need to try to do the best that we can. If your name was one of those appearing in Hebrews 11, what do you think the writer would say about you? That's something to think about. If your name was one of the appearing in there, what would they say? Why do the ancients, Old Testament faithful, deserve honor? How would you describe the faith for which you are honored? Do you typically need to feel a full of faith before you can obey God? Give some examples when you think about that. When you think about God, what are the examples? How can we live by faith? You say we walk by faith and not by sight, but then you stress all the time. So when we look at this whole thing called life and the situation and we put it all in perspective, what are we saying? What are we saying when we say that, hey, it's by faith we do this, it's by faith we do this, or we do that. It's by faith that we structure before God. It's by faith it's impossible to please without faith, it's impossible to please God. Where are we as we cross the pendulum stage of being in the middle? Where do we find ourselves? What does it look like as we look in our lives and we figure out so many different things? Ladies and gentlemen, as I close tonight and we look at our situations, what is God telling you about this faith walk? Let's do it and be excited about where we are. God bless you. Father, we thank you for this opportunity and we appreciate you. Bless now in Jesus' name.